What if the most important stories in the Bible are the ones that were never written down? That simple question unlocks a mystery that has haunted biblical scholars for thousands of years. Exodus 24:18 tells us Moses spent 40 days and nights on Mount Sinai, yet the Bible records only a fraction of what happened there. Most people assume the Torah gives us the complete account of Moses' encounters with God, but history reveals something far more troubling. Ancient Jewish traditions speak of revelations Moses received but never shared, secret teachings he locked away, knowledge he deliberately buried in coded language and strategic silence. In this investigation, we will move through three critical discoveries. First, we will examine the evidence of intentional omissions within the texts Moses wrote. Then we will explore what those blank spaces might conceal. And finally, we will confront the disturbing possibility that some truths were too dangerous to survive in written form. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. Moses stands alone in biblical history. He spoke with God face to face according to Deuteronomy 34:10. He climbed into cloud and fire. He descended with stone tablets and a face that glowed with otherworldly light. Yet the man who wrote Genesis never explained where he got his information about creation. He never revealed his sources for the stories of Adam, Noah, and Abraham. He recorded the genealogies but left gaps that spanned centuries. He described the Tower of Babel but omitted crucial details about what the builders were actually attempting to reach. These silences are not accidental. They form a pattern, a deliberate architecture of concealment that runs through the entire Pentateuch. Ancient rabbinical scholars called these gaps the white fire of Torah. The black letters tell one story, but the white spaces between the letters contain another story entirely, a story Moses protected by refusing to speak it aloud. Consider the structure of Genesis itself. The creation account in chapter 1 uses the name Elohim for God, but chapter 2 suddenly switches to Yahweh. Scholars have debated this shift for centuries, proposing multiple authors and editorial layers, yet mystical Jewish tradition offers a different explanation. Moses used two names because he was describing two different aspects of the divine, or perhaps two different encounters, one that could be shared and one that had to remain hidden. The text gives us clues if we know where to look. Genesis 1:1 begins with the Hebrew letter Bet, not Aleph. Why would Moses start the Torah with the second letter of the alphabet instead of the first? Ancient commentators noticed this immediately. Some taught that the missing Aleph represents hidden knowledge that came before creation, knowledge Moses possessed but could not write. The opening word of the Bible itself announces that something has been deliberately omitted. Throughout Genesis, Moses writes with unusual precision. He counts days, he tracks genealogies across generations, he preserves specific names and locations. This is not the work of someone passing down oral folklore. This is documentation, careful selection, and strategic editing. Moses had access to ancient sources, perhaps written records that survived the flood, traditions passed down through Abraham's family, or direct revelation from God. But he did not transcribe everything he knew. He made choices about what to include and what to suppress. The story of the Nephilim in Genesis 6 appears almost as an afterthought. Just 2 verses about giants born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Then Moses moves on as if he has said nothing remarkable. But the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that was scripture to some early Jewish communities, devotes entire chapters to this event. It describes fallen angels by name. It details their forbidden teachings. It explains their corruption of humanity and creation itself. Moses would have known these stories, yet he reduced them to 2 cryptic verses and never mentioned them again. Why? What was Moses protecting us from, or what was he protecting from us? If you're finding these questions fascinating, make sure you subscribe. This investigation goes deeper than anything you've encountered before. We're going to uncover evidence that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Bible's most foundational texts. The opening chapters of Genesis contain another curious omission. The text tells us God created light on day 1, but the sun, moon, and stars do not appear until day 4. Skeptics use this to attack the biblical account as scientifically impossible. Yet ancient Jewish mysticism teaches that the first light was not physical light at all. It was primordial light, divine light, the light of God's direct presence. And according to tradition, Moses knew exactly what that light was because he experienced it himself on Mount Sinai. But Moses never explained it in Genesis. He wrote the sequence. He left the mystery intact. He preserved the question without answering it. This was not ignorance. This was intentional obscurity, the kind of concealment that protects sacred knowledge from those not ready to receive it. As we continue through the Torah, we find more blank spaces. Moses describes the tabernacle in exhaustive detail. Every curtain, every socket, every measurement preserved with architectural precision. Yet when he recounts his actual experiences inside the tent of meeting, the text becomes suddenly vague. Exodus 33:11 says the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. But what did they discuss? What did Moses see? What was revealed in those intimate conversations? The text offers nothing, only silence. That silence becomes even more significant when we realize Moses wrote these books during the 40 years of wandering. He was not a young man transcribing recent memories. He was elderly, exhausted, carrying the weight of leading a rebellious nation through the wilderness. He knew he would die before entering the Promised Land. He knew these texts would become the foundation of Israel's identity for all future generations. Every word mattered. Every omission was a choice. And Moses chose to leave certain doors closed, certain questions unanswered, certain revelations buried in metaphor and symbol rather than stated plainly. The question we must confront is simple but profound. What did Moses know that we are not allowed to know? And once we start seeing the pattern of concealment, we cannot unsee it. The deeper we dig, the more evidence we find. But what comes next will shock you. Chapter 2. The Architect of Silence. Moses did not just write scripture, he engineered it. Every verse in the Pentateuch shows evidence of careful construction, deliberate pacing, and strategic information management. This was not ancient storytelling, this was architecture. And the most important structural elements are the ones Moses left invisible. Numbers 12:3 makes a startling claim. It calls Moses the most humble man on earth. Yet this statement appears in a text that Moses himself wrote. Critics point to this as evidence of later editing. But Jewish tradition offers another interpretation. Moses wrote about himself in third person because he was documenting events, not promoting himself. He included this detail because humility was central to his authority. A proud man could not have survived what Moses experienced. Pride would have destroyed him the moment he glimpsed the divine. That humility extended to his writing. Moses possessed knowledge that could have made him the most powerful figure in human history. He could have recorded secrets that would have elevated him above every prophet, priest, and king. Instead, he wrote himself as a flawed, reluctant leader who constantly failed and needed God's intervention. He preserved his mistakes, his doubts, his moment of striking the rock in anger that cost him entry into the Promised Land. Why document your own failures unless you are committed to truth over reputation? But Moses protected certain truths even as he exposed his own weaknesses. Deuteronomy 34 describes Moses' death and burial. It states clearly that no one knows where his grave is located. Yet someone wrote those words. Someone recorded the account of Moses dying alone on Mount Nebo after seeing the Promised Land from a distance. Jewish tradition holds that Joshua wrote this final chapter, but the text itself maintains Moses' voice and style. It continues the pattern of concealment that defined his entire ministry. God buried Moses in a hidden location, no shrine, no monument, no place for future generations to worship or seek power from his remains. Even in death, Moses disappeared into mystery. His body was hidden. His final words were hidden. And according to ancient sources, his greatest revelations were hidden with him. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text that expands on Genesis and Exodus, claims Moses received its contents directly from the angel of the presence while on Mount Sinai. It provides detailed chronologies, additional stories about the patriarchs, and explanations for various laws and festivals. Yet Moses never included this material in the Torah. He had access to enhanced versions of the stories he recorded. He chose the abbreviated forms instead. Why? Because Moses understood something fundamental about revelation. Not all truth can be spoken aloud. Not all knowledge should be written down. Some things must be transmitted through other channels: oral tradition, mystical experience, direct encounter with the divine. The written text serves as a map, not the territory itself. It points toward truth without fully containing it. This principle appears throughout the Torah in the form of what scholars call narrative gaps. Stories that begin but do not finish, characters who appear suddenly without introduction, events that are mentioned once and never explained. These gaps are not errors, they are features, intentional spaces that invite deeper inquiry while protecting sacred boundaries. Take the mysterious figure of Melchizedek in Genesis 14. He appears without warning as the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He blesses Abraham. He receives tithes from him. Then he vanishes from the narrative completely. No genealogy, no explanation of how a Canaanite king became a priest of the true God. No follow-up story. Just a sudden appearance and disappearance that left rabbis and theologians debating his identity for thousands of years. Psalm 110 later refers to a future king in the order of Melchizedek. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament develops this into a full theology of Christ's eternal priesthood. But Moses gave us almost nothing. 2 brief encounters in Genesis, then silence. What did Moses know about Melchizedek that he chose not to write? The answer matters because Melchizedek represents something that predates Abraham, predates the covenant, predates the law. Something ancient and mysterious that Moses acknowledged but would not fully explain. If you're gripped by these mysteries, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What do you think Moses was hiding? What secrets do you believe are buried in the white spaces of Scripture? Your insights might unlock something we have all missed. The pattern continues with the enigmatic Urim and Thummim. Exodus 28 describes these objects as part of the high priest's breastplate. They were used to determine God's will, to receive yes or no answers to critical questions. But Moses never explains what they were, how they worked, or where they came from. He simply includes them in the priestly garments as if everyone already knows what they are. Later, biblical texts mention them occasionally, always assuming the reader understands. But by the time of the Second Temple period, the Urim and Thummim had been lost, their function forgotten, their nature unknown. Moses had direct access to these sacred objects. He oversaw their construction. He watched Aaron use them, yet he wrote nothing that would help future generations recreate them or understand them. The knowledge died with the generation that experienced it firsthand. Another deliberate gap in the record. Ancient Jewish mysticism teaches that Moses received the Torah in 3 forms. The written Torah everyone knows, the oral Torah that was passed down through rabbinical tradition, and a secret Torah that was never meant to be shared except with the spiritually mature. This third level contained the deepest mysteries of creation, the hidden names of God, the structure of heavenly realms, and the true nature of evil. Moses carried this knowledge throughout his life, but never codified it in writing. The oral tradition eventually became the Talmud and other rabbinical texts, but the secret tradition remained hidden, passed from master to student in whispered teachings and mystical practices. The Kabbalah emerged from these hidden streams, offering elaborate systems for understanding the divine that go far beyond the plain meaning of Scripture, and all of it traces back to Moses. All of it claims to reveal what Moses knew but did not write. But here is the disturbing question. If Moses deliberately concealed certain knowledge, what happens when people try to uncover it? Is there a reason those truths were buried? Does seeking forbidden knowledge carry consequences? Ancient warnings suggest it does. Stories of rabbis who delved too deep into mystical texts and went mad. Accounts of students who accessed secret teachings before they were ready and suffered spiritual catastrophe. Moses built protective barriers into the text itself, and those barriers might exist for our safety. Deuteronomy 29:29 offers a key insight. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Moses draws a clear line. Some knowledge belongs to God alone. Human beings are meant to live with mystery, with unanswered questions, with truths that remain beyond our reach. The Torah gives us what we need, but not everything that exists. Moses modeled this in his own life. He climbed the mountain alone. He entered the thick darkness where God was. He saw what no other human had seen. But when he descended, he brought tablets of stone with 10 commandments, not detailed accounts of the throne room of heaven, not revelations about the angelic hierarchies, not explanations of how God created reality from nothing. Just 10 laws, clear, practical, human-scale guidance for how to live. The rest remained in the darkness, deliberately, protectively, wisely. And yet, the fact that it remained hidden does not mean it disappeared. The knowledge Moses possessed still exists somewhere, in coded form, in mystical interpretation, in the white spaces between the black letters, and certain signs suggest that some of that hidden knowledge is beginning to surface. But what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Chapter 3, 40 Days of Forbidden Knowledge. Exodus 24 describes one of the most significant events in biblical history. Moses ascended Mount Sinai and remained there for 40 days and 40 nights. The text tells us he received the 10 commandments and detailed instructions for the tabernacle. But 40 days and nights is a long time, more than 5 weeks of uninterrupted communion with the divine. What else happened up there? The biblical account focuses on laws, measurements, and priestly garments, practical matters, but ancient sources suggest something far more profound took place. Something that transformed Moses so completely that his face literally glowed with residual divine light when he returned. Exodus 34:29 describes this phenomenon. The Israelites feared to approach him. Moses had to veil his face because the glory radiating from him was too intense for people to endure. This was not metaphor. This was physical transformation. Moses had been changed at a cellular level by what he experienced. And that experience involved more than receiving construction blueprints for a tent. According to Jewish mystical tradition, Moses was shown the entire sweep of history from creation to the end of days. He saw the future generations of Israel. He witnessed their triumphs and catastrophes. He observed the coming of prophets, kings, and the Messiah, all of it revealed in a moment of timeless vision. But Moses wrote none of this in the Torah. He emerged from that encounter with cosmic knowledge, but chose to record only the immediate practical instructions for Israel's worship system. The rest remained locked in his memory, shared perhaps with Joshua or the elders in fragments, but never codified, never made public, never given permanent form in Scripture. The ancient Book of Jubilees claims the angel of the present dictated its contents to Moses during these 40 days. It provides a detailed chronology of the world from creation forward, organizing history into Jubilee cycles of 49 years. It includes stories not found in Genesis. It expands on the lives of the patriarchs. It explains the origin of demons and the ongoing war between light and darkness. Yet Moses excluded all of this from the canonical Torah. He possessed this expanded account but wrote the condensed version instead. Why the restraint? Because Moses understood timing. Revelation must match the capacity of the receiver. The Israelites who stood at the base of Mount Sinai were recently freed slaves. They were traumatized, undisciplined, prone to panic and rebellion. Within days of Moses ascending the mountain, they built a golden calf and declared it their god. These were not people ready for cosmic mysteries. They needed basic guidance, clear rules, tangible systems of worship. Moses gave them what they could handle and withheld what would destroy them, but the withheld knowledge did not disappear. Moses carried it, and according to tradition, he encoded hints of it throughout the Torah in ways that later generations could gradually uncover. The surface text provided the foundation. The deeper layers waited for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. This is why Jewish tradition emphasizes endless study and interpretation. The Torah is not a book to be read once and understood. It is a gateway to infinite depths that reveal themselves slowly over lifetimes of contemplation. During those 40 days, Moses also received something the Bible barely mentions. Exodus 31:18 states that God gave him 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God, but ancient rabbinical commentary suggests there was more. Some traditions speak of a heavenly Torah, a pristine original that exists in the presence of God, written in black fire on white fire. Moses saw this original, he read from it, he absorbed its contents, but the earthly Torah he transcribed is only a shadow of that heavenly reality. Make sure you share this video with anyone interested in biblical mysteries. These are not fringe theories, these are ancient Jewish traditions that have shaped how scholars understand Scripture for thousands of years, and they reveal a Moses far more complex than Sunday school versions portray. The concept of black fire and white fire is crucial. The black fire represents the written words of the Torah, but the white fire, the spaces between the letters, contains equal revelation. Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages in Jewish history, taught that every letter, every space, every decorative crown on the Hebrew letters carries meaning. Nothing in the Torah is accidental. Everything is intentional. And the white spaces, the silence, the omissions, these communicate truths that words cannot capture. Moses learned to read both fires during his 40 days on the mountain. He learned when to write and when to remain silent. He learned that some truths self-destruct when spoken aloud. They can only be known through experience, through mystical ascent, through personal encounter with the divine. The Torah points toward these truths but cannot contain them. It functions like a ladder that Moses set up between earth and heaven, inviting others to climb while warning them of the dangers that await at higher altitudes. But something else happened on that mountain, something that broke Moses in ways the text only hints at. When he descended and found the people worshipping the golden calf, his response was catastrophic. He shattered the first set of tablets. He ground the idol to powder and made the people drink it. He called for the Levites to execute 3,000 Israelites who refused to repent. This was not the humble, patient Moses who had led them out of Egypt. This was a man pushed past his breaking point. What had he seen on the mountain that made the golden calf so unforgivable? What knowledge had he gained that turned Israel's betrayal into something worthy of mass execution? The text does not explain his fury. It simply records his actions and moves on. But the intensity of his reaction suggests he understood dimensions of the sin that others could not grasp. He had seen something of God's holiness, something of the cosmic order, something that made idolatry not just foolish, but existentially dangerous. Exodus 33 records Moses' request to see God's glory. God agrees but warns him that no one can see God's face and live. So God places Moses in the cleft of a rock, covers him with a hand, and allows his glory to pass by. Moses sees God's back, but not his face. This bizarre anthropomorphic language has troubled commentators for centuries, but mystical tradition interprets it as describing levels of revelation. Moses was granted access to as much of the divine presence as a human being could experience without disintegrating. He reached the absolute limit of what embodied consciousness can endure. And what did he learn at that limit? What truths exist at the boundary between the human and the divine? Moses never said. He wrote that God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. But these attributes are the smallest fraction of what he perceived. The rest remained beyond language, beyond writing, beyond transmission. Moses stood at the edge of infinity and returned with a handful of words that barely scratched the surface. The second set of tablets that replaced the shattered originals were different from the first. Exodus 34:1 says Moses had to cut the stone tablets himself, whereas God had provided the first set. Some rabbis teach that the second tablets contained less revelation than the first. The people's sin with the golden calf cost them access to a higher level of truth. Moses descended the first time with unmediated divine revelation. He descended the second time with revelation filtered through human agency, diminished by human failure, accommodated to human limitation. If that interpretation is correct, then the Torah we possess is already a reduced version, a compromised text. the best that could be salvaged after catastrophic betrayal. And Moses knew it. He lived the rest of his life knowing that Israel had lost something irreplaceable on that day, something they might never recover. And yet, the knowledge of what was lost remained hidden, because even knowing what you have missed can be a form of unbearable torment. But our investigation has only just begun. Chapter 4. The name that was erased, Genesis, begins with Elohim creating the heavens and the earth. But by chapter 2, the text switches to Yahweh, Elohim, the Lord God. This shift has generated centuries of scholarly debate about multiple source documents and editorial layers. Yet ancient mystical tradition offers a more disturbing explanation. Moses used different divine names because he was describing different divine revelations, or because he was distinguishing between the true God and something else that had once been worshipped as divine. The Hebrew word Elohim is grammatically plural. It can mean gods, divine beings, or heavenly powers. Context determines whether it refers to the one true God or to other spiritual entities. Genesis 1 uses Elohim without the definite article, which opens interpretive possibilities. Who exactly was creating in Genesis 1? The traditional answer is obvious, the God of Israel. But mystical texts ask a more provocative question. What if Moses deliberately left that verse ambiguous? What if he knew something about creation that the text conceals? Genesis 1:26 records Elohim saying, "Let us make mankind in our image." The plural pronouns have generated endless speculation. Christian tradition interprets this as the Trinity. Jewish tradition usually explains it as God consulting with angels or using a royal plural, but neither explanation fully satisfies. Why would God need angelic consultation for the creation of humanity? And why use plural language only at this moment? Ancient texts outside the Bible offer clues. The Book of Enoch describes a council of heavenly beings involved in the governance of creation. The Dead Sea Scrolls mention the sons of God and the holy ones participating in divine decisions. Early Jewish mysticism speaks of emanations from the divine, attributes of God that function almost as separate entities while remaining unified in essence. Moses would have been aware of these traditions. He would have understood creation as involving more complexity than a simple 6-day timeline suggests. But Moses wrote Genesis with extreme economy. He reduced the creation story to 2 chapters. He stripped away the mythological elements that filled surrounding ancient Near Eastern cultures. He removed the names of cosmic powers that other nations worshipped. And according to some traditions, he erased one name in particular, a name that, if spoken or written, could reactivate ancient powers that were meant to remain dormant. Subscribe now if you want to understand what Moses was protecting us from. This is not conspiracy theory. This is ancient tradition preserved by Jewish mystics who spent their lives studying these texts. And what they discovered will trouble you. The name that was erased, according to these traditions, belonged to a being that existed before the rebellion of the angels. A being involved in creation itself who later turned against the divine order. Not Satan, who appears in the text as the serpent and later as the accuser. Something older, something more foundational, an entity whose removal from history required extraordinary measures. Gnostic texts, which were rejected by mainstream Christianity and Judaism, preserve fragments of this name. They speak of a demiurge, a false creator who shaped the material world in opposition to the true divine. They described this being as ignorant or malevolent, trapping spiritual beings in physical bodies. Orthodox tradition rejected these teachings as heresy, but the traditions existed, and they point back to something Moses might have known. If Moses was aware of such an entity, what would he have done? He could not simply include its name in Genesis and explain its role. That would give it power, recognition, continued existence in human memory. Instead, he would have written around it. He would have told the story of creation in a way that excluded it completely. He would have used terminology carefully, deployed divine names strategically, and left gaps in the narrative where this entity would have appeared. This would explain the plural language in Genesis 1:26, not as God consulting with angels, but as Moses carefully navigating a complex cosmological reality without giving power to entities that should not be named. It would explain why Elohim appears without the definite article in certain verses. Moses was indicating complexity without detailing it. He was pointing toward truths he could not fully state. It would also explain the abrupt shift to Yahweh Elohim in Genesis 2. Once Moses has established the basic framework of creation using the ambiguous Elohim, he introduces the specific personal name of Israel's God. He narrows the focus. He makes clear that whatever complexity existed in the beginning, the God who walks in the garden and speaks with Adam is Yahweh, the I Am, the covenant God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same God who revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush. But the earlier chapter remains deliberately obscure, and that obscurity has protected something dangerous from emerging into clear view. Generations of readers have passed over Genesis 1 without noticing what might be missing. They read the story of creation and see only God. They do not perceive the absence. They do not recognize the name that was never written, and perhaps that was exactly Moses' intention. Deuteronomy 29:29. But 29 becomes significant again here. The secret things belong to the Lord. Moses knew things about the origins of reality that we are not meant to know, and he structured Genesis to preserve that boundary. He gave us a true account of creation, but not a complete account. He told us enough to understand our place in the cosmos and our relationship with God, but he withheld the dangerous knowledge, the forbidden names, the cosmic history that could lead us into spiritual catastrophe. The mystical Jewish practice of gematria, which assigns numerical values to Hebrew letters, reveals hidden patterns in the text of Genesis. Scholars who have spent lifetimes analyzing these patterns claim to have found evidence of deliberate encryption, verses that contain mathematical relationships that could not be accidental, patterns that spell out hidden names or reveal concealed messages. And some of these patterns point toward an absence, a gap, a space where something should be but is not. If you find this unsettling, leave a comment below. What do you think Moses erased from Genesis? What name was too dangerous to preserve? The conversation around these questions matters because we are not just studying ancient history. We are confronting the structure of reality itself. And Moses, standing at the boundary between the human and divine, made choices that still shape our understanding today. But the most shocking revelation is still ahead. Chapter 5. The Exodus before the Exodus. The Exodus is the defining event of Israel's history. The story of slavery, plagues, liberation, and covenant forms the foundation of Jewish identity. But ancient sources hint at something that almost no one knows. The Exodus led by Moses was not the first Exodus from Egypt. There was an earlier departure, a group that left before the Israelites. A people who carried secrets out of Egypt that were never supposed to see daylight again. This claim appears in fragmentary texts, whispered traditions, and oblique references in mystical literature. It does not appear in the canonical Bible. Moses did not record it in the Torah, but that absence might be the point. Some stories are suppressed, not because they are false, but because they are too dangerous to tell. Egyptian records from the period before Moses mention groups of Semitic people living in the Goshen region. They were laborers, builders, servants to the pharaohs. But some texts also mention a group that disappeared. No explanation, no record of death or deportation. They simply vanished from Egyptian records during a period of political chaos. Traditional Egyptology treats this as a clerical gap or lost documents. But alternative interpreters ask a different question. What if they left? What if there was an exodus before the Exodus? Who were these people? According to the fragmentary traditions, they were a sect within the Hebrew population, a group devoted to older knowledge, secret traditions, forbidden practices. They had access to Egyptian mysteries through their work on temple projects and royal construction. They learned things the Egyptians guarded carefully, names of power, rituals of transformation, methods for contacting entities that existed beyond the physical realm, and they used this knowledge to engineer their own escape from bondage. But their departure was not blessed by God. It was not accompanied by plagues or miracles. It was a breakaway movement, a rebellion not against Pharaoh alone, but against the divine plan itself. They rejected waiting for God's deliverance and took matters into their own hands using occult power. And they succeeded. They walked out of Egypt carrying with them scrolls, artifacts, and knowledge that Moses would later have to suppress when he led the true Exodus decades later. This earlier group disappeared into the wilderness. Some traditions say they traveled east toward Mesopotamia. Others claim they went north into what is now Lebanon and Syria. Still others suggest they fractured into multiple sects that scattered across the ancient world, each preserving fragments of the forbidden knowledge they had stolen from Egypt. But wherever they went, they left no clear trace in mainstream history. Only hints, only shadows, only whispers in mystical texts that most people never read. If this sounds too strange to believe, hit that like button and comment your thoughts. The evidence for this hidden exodus is fragmentary, but it exists, and it explains anomalies in the biblical text that have puzzled scholars for centuries. Because Moses would have known about this earlier group. He grew up in Pharaoh's household. He had access to Egyptian records, and when God called him to lead the true Exodus, part of his mission might have been to correct the disaster that the earlier Exodus had created. This is why Moses was so insistent on doing things God's way. This is why he resisted Pharaoh's compromises that would have allowed a partial departure. This is why he demanded that every Israelite participate in the Passover ritual and apply blood to their doorposts. Moses was establishing a clear distinction. This Exodus would be different. This Exodus would be sanctified. This Exodus would not rely on stolen Egyptian magic, but on the power of Yahweh alone. It also explains Moses' fierce reaction to the golden calf. Exodus 32 records that the people made the idol while Moses was on Mount Sinai. But where did they get the knowledge to do it? How did recently freed slaves know the rituals and designs for creating a god image? They had lived under Egyptian oppression for generations. Yet the moment Moses turned his back, they spontaneously reverted to pagan worship with startling sophistication, unless they had learned it from someone else. Unless there were people among the Israelites who carried knowledge from the earlier Exodus, secret practitioners who had preserved forbidden techniques. When Moses left to meet with God, these hidden teachers emerged. They convinced the people to create the golden calf using methods that predated Moses' leadership. Moses was not just fighting idolatry, he was fighting a contamination that had infiltrated his people from an older, darker source. The 3,000 people executed after the golden calf incident were not random. Exodus 32:27 records that the Levites went through the camp killing their own brothers, friends, and neighbors. This was targeted elimination. Moses was purging specific individuals, those who knew too much, those who had been infected by the earlier Exodus's forbidden knowledge, those who threatened to corrupt Israel's covenant relationship with God by introducing practices that God had explicitly forbidden. This interpretation makes Moses' actions comprehensible. He was not a tyrant randomly killing people for making a statue. He was a leader rooting out a spiritual cancer that threatened the survival of his people. The earlier Exodus had shown what happens when people try to achieve liberation through occult power rather than faithfulness to God. It leads to corruption, fragmentation, and spiritual death. Moses would not allow that pattern to repeat. But Moses never wrote about the earlier Exodus in the Torah. He never explained where the golden calf knowledge came from. He never detailed the spiritual warfare he was fighting. He simply recorded the event and its consequences and moved on. Another gap, another silence, another truth too dangerous to preserve in clear language. Jewish mystical texts occasionally reference this hidden exodus in coded terms. They speak of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude that accompanied Israel out of Egypt, according to Exodus 12:38. This group is blamed for many of Israel's subsequent rebellions. But who exactly were they? Standard interpretation suggests they were Egyptians and other foreigners who joined Israel's departure. But mystical tradition sees them as something more sinister. Descendants or disciples of the earlier Exodus. People who carried spiritual contamination into the heart of the covenant community. Moses allowed them to come because God had commanded him to welcome anyone who wanted to join Israel, but he watched them carefully. He structured the law in ways that would expose and contain their influence, and when they revealed themselves through rebellion or false teaching, he acted decisively. The severity of certain punishments in the Torah makes sense only if Moses was fighting a hidden enemy, not just managing ordinary human sin. Numbers 16 records the rebellion of Korah, a Levite who challenged Moses' authority. The earth opened and swallowed Korah and his followers alive. This supernatural judgment seems extreme for a political disagreement, unless Korah represented something more than personal ambition, unless he was advocating for alternative spiritual practices rooted in the forbidden knowledge of the earlier Exodus. Moses' response would then be defensive, not tyrannical. He was protecting Israel from spiritual poison disguised as legitimate religious innovation. The pattern repeats throughout Israel's history, groups emerging that claim special knowledge, practices that blend worship of Yahweh with elements borrowed from surrounding cultures, prophets who challenge these syncretistic movements with fierce denunciations. All of it traces back to the conflict Moses fought. The battle between the true covenant and the counterfeit, between revelation received from God and knowledge stolen through forbidden means. And Moses, by refusing to detail the earlier Exodus in the Torah, prevented that counterfeit tradition from gaining legitimacy. He erased it from the official record, but he could not erase it from history, and its influence echoes forward into our own time. Chapter 6. The Desert Code. The book of Leviticus is the least read book of the Bible. Most people find it boring, tedious, irrelevant. Endless chapters about sacrifices, skin diseases, dietary restrictions, and purity rituals. Modern readers skip it entirely or treat it as outdated religious regulation with no contemporary application. But ancient Jewish mystics saw something very different in Leviticus. They saw code, encryption, layered meaning that conceals revolutionary knowledge beneath the surface of mundane instruction. Moses spent enormous time detailing these rituals. Leviticus and portions of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy provide exhaustive specifications for worship, priesthood, festivals, and daily life. Why this obsessive level of detail? Why record the exact measurements of the altar, the precise mixture of incense, the specific procedures for different types of sacrifices? On the surface, it seems like religious bureaucracy. But what if Moses was doing something else entirely? What if he was encoding the knowledge he could not state directly? What if the sacrificial system, with its elaborate symbolism and precise requirements, functions as a key to unlock deeper mysteries? Ancient rabbis taught that every detail in the Torah contains worlds of meaning. The type of animal sacrificed, the manner of its death, the disposition of its blood and fat, all of this communicates spiritual realities that cannot be expressed in abstract theological language. The Desert Code, as mystical tradition calls it, operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The plain meaning provides instructions for Israelite worship, but beneath that surface patterns emerge. Mathematical relationships, symbolic resonances, connections between seemingly unrelated laws that reveal hidden structures. Moses buried revelation in ritual. He concealed theology in legislation. He transformed practical instruction into mystical gateway. Consider the Day of Atonement ritual in Leviticus 16. The high priest performs an elaborate ceremony involving 2 goats. One is sacrificed as a sin offering. The other, the scapegoat, has the sins of Israel confessed over it and is then sent into the wilderness to Azazel. Standard interpretation focuses on the symbolism of atonement and purification, but mystical tradition asks deeper questions. Who or what is Azazel? Why send a goat to this entity? What is actually happening in this ritual? The Book of Enoch identifies Azazel as one of the leaders of the fallen angels who corrupted humanity before the flood. He taught forbidden knowledge to humans, including weapons, cosmetics, and sorcery. God bound him in the desert until the final judgment. The Day of Atonement ritual, then, is not just about purifying Israel. It is about ritually returning sin to its source, sending the contamination back to the entity who introduced it. Moses encoded a confrontation with cosmic evil into Israel's most sacred holy day, but he never explained it plainly in the text. He gave the instructions without the interpretive key. Generations of priests performed the ritual without fully understanding what they were doing. The ritual worked whether they understood or not, but the deeper meaning remained hidden, accessible only to those who studied the coded language and connected it to traditions Moses preserved outside the written Torah. Make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next reveals why Moses encrypted this knowledge instead of stating it directly. The answer involves power and danger, and the possibility that certain truths become active when spoken aloud. The entire sacrificial system operates as a symbolic grammar. Different animals represent different spiritual states. Bulls symbolize strength and stubbornness. Goats represent sin and wilderness. Lambs represent innocence and vulnerability. The type of animal you sacrificed depended on what you were confessing or celebrating. But ancient mystics noticed something else. When you mapped the animals to Hebrew letters using gematria, patterns emerge. The sacrifices spell out divine names. They trace the structure of creation. They enact cosmic repair at a level beyond human comprehension. Moses designed this system during the 40 years of wilderness wandering. He was not just organizing worship. He was building a machine, a spiritual technology that would connect heaven and earth, channel divine energy into the physical world, and protect Israel from the forces that had corrupted other nations. The tabernacle itself was a microcosm, a portable model of the universe. Its 3 sections, the outer court, the holy place, and the most holy place, corresponded to the physical world, the heavenly realm, and the direct presence of God. Moving through the tabernacle was a journey from earth to heaven, from material to spiritual, from profane to sacred. The priests who served in the tabernacle were trained in the mechanics of this system, but even they did not fully understand what they were doing. They followed Moses' instructions with precision because he warned them that deviation would result in death, and he was not exaggerating. Leviticus 10 records the deaths of Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, who offered unauthorized fire before the Lord. They improvised. They thought they understood the system well enough to innovate, and they died instantly. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. This was not divine cruelty. This was the consequence of mishandling spiritual power. Moses had built a system that operated according to precise specifications. Changing those specifications was like rewiring a nuclear reactor without understanding the physics. Nadab and Abihu triggered something they did not comprehend, and it killed them. Moses used their deaths as an object lesson. Do exactly what I have written. Do not deviate. Do not improvise. The knowledge encoded in these rituals is beyond your understanding, but it will function if you follow the instructions exactly. This reveals why Moses was so meticulous in recording every detail. He was not being obsessive. He was providing the operating manual for a system that future generations would need to maintain without understanding its full depth. The surface instructions would keep them safe. The deeper meanings would reveal themselves gradually to those who studied diligently and approached with proper humility. But there is another layer. Some mystical texts claim Moses encoded prophecy into the sacrificial calendar, the timing of festivals, the sequence of offerings, the cycles of Sabbaths and Jubilee years. All of this maps onto the timeline of human history. The 7 days of creation correspond to 7,000 years of world history. The festivals reenact not just past events, but future events. Passover is not only about the exodus from Egypt, but about ultimate liberation from death. The Day of Atonement is not only about annual purification, but about final judgment and cosmic reconciliation. If this is true, then Moses was not just recording rituals. He was embedding a prophetic calendar into Israel's worship system. He was allowing future generations to ritually participate in events that had not yet occurred. He was creating a template that would guide history itself toward its appointed conclusion. And all of this is hidden beneath instructions about grain offerings and fellowship sacrifices that most people find unbearably dull. The desert code also appears in the arrangement of Israel's camp. Numbers 2 describes how the 12 tribes were positioned around the tabernacle during the wilderness journey. Each tribe had a specific location. Each had a standard, a banner that identified them. Ancient rabbis noticed that when you map the camp from above, it forms a cross shape with the tabernacle at the center, 4 tribes on each side, 3 tribes in each cardinal direction. This arrangement was not arbitrary. It was geometric, intentional, and it contained meaning that Moses never explained in the text. Some interpreters see this as a prophetic pointer to the crucifixion, the moment when God's presence would be manifest in human form and surrounded by suffering humanity. Others see it as a cosmic map, with Israel positioned at the center of reality, mediating between heaven and earth. Still others see it as a defensive formation, using the tabernacle as the spiritual heart protected by 12 guardians representing all of humanity, descended from the 12 sons of Jacob. All of these interpretations might be true simultaneously. Moses encoded multiple meanings into a single structure, and he let that structure speak for itself without verbose explanation. This is the genius of the Desert Code. It operates whether or not you understand it. The rituals work. The camp formation works. The festival calendar works. You can participate in the system and receive its benefits without grasping its depths. But for those who seek, for those who study, for those willing to see beyond the surface, infinite layers of revelation wait to be discovered. Moses built a door that anyone can enter, but only the persistent can fully explore. And what they find inside changes everything. But we are not done yet. The darkest part of Moses' story is still ahead. Chapter 7. The burden that broke a prophet. Numbers 11:15 preserves one of the most disturbing prayers in the entire Bible. Moses, speaking to God, says this: "If you are going to treat me like this, put me to death right now. If I have found favor in your eyes, do not let me face my own ruin." This is not the prayer of a leader experiencing normal stress. This is a man begging for death, a prophet who has reached his absolute limit and sees no way forward except extinction. What happened to Moses? The standard interpretation focuses on the burden of leadership. The Israelites were complaining constantly. They wanted meat instead of manna. They were threatening rebellion. Moses felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing millions of stubborn people in the wilderness. This is true as far as it goes, but it does not explain the intensity of Moses' despair. Leaders face rebellious followers all the time without begging God to kill them. Something deeper was destroying Moses from the inside, something connected to the knowledge he carried, the secrets he had seen, the truths he could not share. Ancient mystical texts suggest that Moses suffered from what we might now call spiritual trauma. He had experienced realities that human consciousness is not designed to process. He had stood in the presence of the infinite and returned to the finite, and the gap between those two states was crushing him. Deuteronomy 34:7 tells us that when Moses died at age 120, his eyes were not weak and his strength was not gone. Physically, he remained vigorous, but Numbers and Deuteronomy document his psychological and spiritual decline. He became more isolated, more severe, more prone to anger. The patience and humility that defined his early leadership eroded under the weight of what he knew. By the end, he was a man barely holding himself together. The incident at Meribah in Numbers 20 reveals the breaking point. The people complained about lack of water. God told Moses to speak to the rock, and it would provide water. But Moses, in a moment of rage and exhaustion, struck the rock twice with his staff instead. Water came out. The people were provided for. But God immediately told Moses that because of this disobedience, he would not enter the promised land. The punishment seems disproportionate to the offense. Moses made one mistake after 40 years of faithful leadership, and God barred him from the goal of his entire life. Unless the mistake was not about hitting a rock, unless it was about something deeper. Some commentators suggest Moses was meant to model a new relationship with God, one based on speaking rather than striking, on trust rather than force. By reverting to the older pattern, he had struck a rock to produce water earlier in Exodus 17. Moses demonstrated that he had not fully internalized the transformation God was working in Israel. He was still operating from Egypt-era paradigms rather than covenant-era faith. But mystical tradition offers another interpretation. Moses' punishment was not arbitrary divine displeasure, it was protective mercy. Moses had seen too much, experienced too much, carried too much. If he entered the promised land, if he established himself as the supreme prophet in Israel's permanent home, his knowledge would become institutionalized. The secrets he carried would be passed down through official channels. The hidden things that should remain hidden would gradually become public. God ended Moses' ministry before that could happen. The death on Mount Nebo was not punishment, it was containment. If this interpretation is correct, then Moses' exclusion from the promised land was the final act of his role as guardian of secrets. Even in his death, he was protecting future generations from knowledge they were not ready to receive. And Moses understood this. Deuteronomy 3 records him pleading with God to let him cross the Jordan. God refused and told him to stop asking. Moses submitted. He accepted that his journey would end on the far side of the river. He climbed Mount Nebo, looked at the land he would never enter, and died alone with God. Comment below if you're seeing the pattern now. Moses' entire life was defined by isolation. He was separated from the Hebrews by growing up in Pharaoh's palace. He was separated from the Egyptians by his Hebrew identity. He was separated from normal humanity by his encounters with God. And he was separated from the promised land by the very knowledge that made him qualified to lead Israel toward it. Moses was the most connected and most isolated person in biblical history simultaneously. Deuteronomy 34 states that no one knows where Moses was buried. God hid his grave so it would not become a shrine. But ancient texts hint at something more. They suggest Moses did not simply die and get buried. They suggest a transformation occurred. Jude 1009 in the New Testament references a dispute between the archangel Michael and the devil over the body of Moses. This bizarre detail appears nowhere in the Old Testament, but it points to traditions about Moses' death that involve spiritual warfare, contested claims, and mysteries that the canonical text chose not to explore. What was so significant about Moses' body? Why would the devil want it? Why would Michael need to fight for it? Unless Moses, even in death, remained a locus of power. Unless his physical remains carried residue of the glory that had transformed him on Mount Sinai. Unless there were forces that wanted access to that power, and forces committed to preventing such access, Moses' burial became the final battlefield in a war that had been raging throughout his life, the war over who would control the knowledge he carried. Moses wrote his own obituary in Deuteronomy 34. He described his death from a future perspective, which some scholars use to argue that someone else wrote this chapter. But Jewish tradition maintains that Moses wrote the entire Torah, including the account of his death. He wrote it prophetically, knowing how his story would end. And he wrote it in a way that concealed as much as it revealed. Even the account of his death contains gaps, silences, mysteries that invite speculation while resisting definitive answers. The Torah ends with Moses dead and buried in an unknown location. Joshua takes leadership. Israel prepares to cross the Jordan. The story continues without the man who made it possible. But Moses' influence does not end. His words continue to shape Israel and, through them, the entire world. The 5 books he wrote become the foundation of 3 major world religions. Billions of people across thousands of years study the words he carefully selected, structured, and encoded. Moses is dead, but his code remains active. His secrets remain buried. His silences remain eloquent. And the question persists. What did Moses know that we still do not know? The final answer might be emerging right now. Chapter 8. The revelation we're not ready for. Ancient Jewish mysticism contains a troubling teaching. It claims that the Torah we possess is the Torah of exile, a diminished version accommodated to human limitation after the golden calf. When the Messiah comes, a higher Torah will be revealed, the Torah of redemption. The original revelations that Moses received on Mount Sinai before Israel's sin, the knowledge that has been hidden for 3,000 years will finally surface, and humanity will discover what Moses always knew but could never say. This is not fringe speculation. This is mainstream Kabbalistic teaching preserved across centuries. It suggests that history is moving toward a moment of revelation, a time when the secrets Moses buried will emerge, when the codes will be broken, when the white fire between the letters will become as readable as the black fire of the written words. And according to those who study these traditions most deeply, we are living in the generation when this emergence begins. The evidence they point to is both textual and experiential. Textually, the 20th and 21st centuries saw unprecedented discoveries. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed ancient biblical manuscripts and previously unknown texts. The Nag Hammadi Library uncovered Gnostic writings that early Christianity suppressed. Archaeological digs across Israel, Egypt, and Mesopotamia brought buried cities and forgotten tablets into daylight. Technology allowed scholars to analyze biblical texts with computational tools that reveal mathematical patterns and literary structures invisible to earlier readers. Knowledge that was hidden is becoming accessible at an accelerating rate. Experientially, mysticism is democratizing. Teachings that were once reserved for elite scholars are now available to anyone with internet access. Practices that required initiation into secret societies can be learned from books and videos. The barriers that protected dangerous knowledge from the unprepared are dissolving, and people are accessing spiritual dimensions that previous generations approached only with extreme caution. The result is both liberation and chaos. Explosion of spiritual experience alongside explosion of spiritual confusion. Some teachers celebrate this as progress. The age of secrets is ending. Humanity is ready for full disclosure. We can handle the truths that Moses withheld. We are sophisticated enough, conscious enough, evolved enough to integrate knowledge that would have destroyed ancient people. The time for protection is over. The time for repetition is over. But other teachers are terrified. They warn that the barriers Moses established were not arbitrary. They were protective. They were necessary. And removing them prematurely will unleash forces that humanity is still not equipped to manage. The revelation Moses suppressed was suppressed for a reason. That reason has not changed. We are not wiser than Moses. We are not more spiritually mature than the generation that received the Torah at Sinai. We are simply more arrogant, and our arrogance is leading us into catastrophe. Both perspectives might be true simultaneously. Revelation might be inevitable and dangerous. The secrets might need to emerge and we might not be ready. History might be forcing a crisis that will either elevate or destroy us. And Moses, standing at the beginning of this process, knew it was coming. He structured the Torah to function across this entire timeline. He wrote for his generation, but also for ours. And the gaps he left, the codes he buried, the silences he maintained, all of it was calibrated to release at the right moment. If you've made it this far in this investigation, you need to share this video with everyone you know. What we're discussing is not academic, it is not abstract theology. This is about the structure of reality and the trajectory of human history. And the choices we make in response to emerging revelation will determine whether we evolve or collapse. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because the conversation continues and you need to be part of it. Deuteronomy 29:29 becomes critical again. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Notice the dynamic language. Secret things belong to God in the present tense, but revealed things belong to us and our children forever. The boundary is not static. Things move from secret to revealed. The question is timing. When does God choose to reveal what was previously hidden? And what happens to people who try to force revelation before its appointed time? History provides cautionary examples. The Second Temple period saw an explosion of mystical speculation and apocalyptic expectation. Groups like the Essenes withdrew into the desert to study hidden meanings and prepare for cosmic transformation. They produced texts like the Book of Enoch and the War Scroll that detailed spiritual realities and future battles. But their movement ended in catastrophe. The Romans destroyed the temple. The Jewish people were scattered. The mystical knowledge they cultivated was suppressed or lost. Only fragments survived. And those fragments suggest they accessed something real, but were overwhelmed by it. The Kabbalistic revival in medieval Spain produced extraordinary spiritual insight. Texts like the Zohar offered profound interpretations of Torah that revealed dimensions of God and creation that earlier generations had not articulated. But this revival occurred during a period of intense persecution. The Spanish Inquisition targeted Jewish communities with horrific violence. Entire populations were forced to convert or die. The mystical flowering was crushed. And later Kabbalists asked whether the two phenomena were connected. Did accessing hidden knowledge trigger catastrophic backlash? Were they punished for unveiling what should have remained concealed? The Sabbatian movement in the 17th century provides an even darker warning. Sabbatai Zevi declared himself the Messiah and attracted massive followings across the Jewish world. He taught that the era of Torah was ending and a new dispensation was beginning. He encouraged violations of traditional law as signs of the new age. And he claimed to have access to secret teachings that Moses had hidden. Thousands believed him. Communities fractured. Then Sabbatai converted to Islam under threat of death, and the movement collapsed in scandal and despair. The incident traumatized Jewish communities for generations, and it reinforced the rabbinic warning: mystical speculation is dangerous, yet the impulse toward hidden knowledge persists. Every generation produces seekers who want to go beyond the surface, who want to access what Moses knew, who believe they are ready for revelation that previous generations could not handle. And sometimes those seekers discover genuine insight, but sometimes they unleash destruction. The line between the two is not always clear until after the damage is done. This brings us to the present moment. The internet has made esoteric knowledge globally accessible. Texts that were once locked in rare bookrooms are available for free download. Teachers who would have reached dozens of students in earlier eras now influence millions through social media. Mystical practices that required years of supervised training are taught in weekend workshops. The gates are open, the barriers are down, and people are flooding into territories that Moses marked as restricted. What will happen? Ancient warnings suggest several possibilities. Some seekers will find genuine transformation. They will access deeper dimensions of faith and consciousness. They will integrate what they discover and become more whole, more wise, more connected to the divine. Moses' codes will unlock for them because they approach with proper humility and preparation. The revelation will be a gift. Others will find confusion. They will access partial truths without the framework to understand them. They will misinterpret symbols and literalize metaphors. They will construct elaborate theories that are intellectually fascinating but spiritually empty. They will become lost in complexity and lose sight of the simple truths that Moses emphasized. Love God, love your neighbor, walk humbly. The revelation will become a distraction. Still others will find danger. They will contact spiritual realities they cannot control. They will open doors they cannot close. They will speak names that should not be spoken, and they will suffer consequences that mystical tradition has warned about for thousands of years. Madness, possession, spiritual death. The revelation will become a curse. Moses knew all of this. He saw the entire timeline from Sinai to the end of days. He understood that his words would eventually be tested in ways he could not prevent. He structured the Torah to function as both gateway and warning. Come deeper, but be careful. Seek, but with reverence. Question, but with humility. The knowledge is here, but it is protected by design, and those protections exist for our benefit. The final question is personal. What will you do with what you now know? Will you respect the boundaries Moses established? Will you approach the mysteries with caution and prayer? Or will you charge ahead, convinced that ancient warnings do not apply to you? The choice matters, because the secrets Moses buried are beginning to surface. The codes are being broken, the white fire is becoming readable, and the revelation we are not ready for is arriving whether we are ready or not. Moses died alone on a mountain, looking at a land he would never enter, but his words entered that land. His Torah crossed the Jordan, his revelation shaped generations, and his silence continues to speak. The greatest prophet who ever lived carried knowledge that would have destroyed his people if revealed too soon. So he wrote carefully, he encoded deeply, he protected fiercely, and he trusted that when the time came, when humanity was ready, the secrets would emerge naturally. That time might be now, And what happens next will determine whether Moses' trust was justified, or whether we will prove once again that some knowledge is too dangerous for human hands. The investigation continues, but it no longer happens in ancient texts alone. It happens in our lives, our choices, our responses to the revelation that surrounds us. Moses set the pattern. We live the consequences, and the story he began 3,000 years ago is racing toward its conclusion. Make sure you are paying attention, because what Moses knew, we are about to discover, and nothing will be the same afterward.